Hi, how's it going? My name is Nick Bush, and I am presenting on a paper tentatively titled Priming and Bombing, a Discourse on the Narrative and Metaphorical Structures in Hasan Minhaj's Prom. I wanted to focus on option 4 for the final presentation, which focuses on an analysis of written text versus oral text. And I wanted to really narrow my research between 3 chapters, a fourth chapter a little bit, but mainly chapters 6, 8, and 9. And today I want us to cover the use of a comedic aside and how that is a very clear indication that something is spoken versus written. I also want to talk about whether Mikhail Bakhtin and his philosophy of heteroglossia would that have helped make him a good composition professor? And then in that vein, how can we take the things that we're learning about narrative and teach them to others and apply them to our own writing, our own storytelling? So Prom was initially written to be performed as a part of an oral storytelling contest called The Moth. I imagine a lot of us are familiar with it on some level. And what makes this text very interesting is that it also, when The Moth published a collection of their stories that were initially oral, they published a written version. And so I was able to get a written version of Prom as well as the original version that was told on stage. And then there's even a third version because he tells Prom again as part of his Homecoming King Netflix special. So we have 3 different versions of the same text written in a very short period of time, but told slightly different because slightly different situations. And so this ties in because I noticed that whenever he said something to be funny and to play to the crowd, that was a moment of improv that would not have been writable. And you could tell that it's written in his voice, and I imagine he had the final word on the preliminary editing, and you can still see him, Minhaj, taking things in a different direction than the written text would have allowed. Now, obviously, he doesn't recreate the story completely, but we see a moment here where you can follow along. This section here says one thing, and then you see him. He doesn't deviate from the content, but the specifics are a little different. So
curly red hair. And she was just like really pretty, and she smelled like Big Red Cinnamon Gun even after PE. I don't know how she did it, but she just was amazing. And we had AP Calc together, and she didn't know about the Davis High social hierarchy, so she thought my jokes were funny, and she thought I was smart, and she really liked my AOL instant message game. Like, whatever I lacked in real life game, my digital game was tight. Like, if you guys had added me on AM back then, ladies, it would have been a game over.
What I like about this is I kind of started to think of it, the improvisational aside. It kind of is the verbal version of Jim from The Office, or several characters from The Office, looking at the camera and shrugging. It's something that you can't really recreate in a different medium, right? Like you can't look at a camera in real life and shrug while telling the story to someone else, right? Or while engaging with someone else. It's not going to have the same effect, right? Just like you can't plan the aside that he comes up with. If he had wrote it down, it wouldn't have worked as well on the page, right? And it probably would have came off stilted when he told it if it was something that he had planned.
Curly red hair.
Okay. Would Mikhail Bakhtin have made a good composition professor? Obviously, that's a little bit more of a clickbait question than an actual question that I'm going to pursue for my presentation or for the paper. But what I did notice is that there's a great deal of heteroglossia in this story. Right here, I have it underlined where the thoughts, that's one type of voice. His regular narration, that's another type of voice. Whenever Hasan Minhaj speaks to someone else, that's another type of voice. So we get just three different types of narrative voices along with the voices he uses of other characters. And I find that engaging because I think that could tell us a lot about what makes for a good story. It's not just things happening or even great characters. You're crazy for Noaz gets into the weirdest situations. Now, it's not just that. It's also being able to texturize the story with many different voices, even if it's the same speaker, the same narrator, still providing different perspectives for those voices. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and how that may vary in written discourse, because I think it's more important in oral discourse. This last part, in terms of how to make a character fun without making fun of a character, I think since Hasan Minhaj is a stand-up comic, he's mostly known as being a theater comic, which means more storytelling. It's more of a slow burn with his humor. Neil Brennan is another. Mike Birbiglia is another type of comic, and it reminded me that if he was telling this story in a stand-up sense, he might have used this Big Red Cinnamon chewing gum, this image. He might have used this as a metaphor, as a vehicle to begin describing her instead of ending on it. Like, this works fine in written, like small, cute, dainty, curly hair that bounced up and down. That's good in written discourse, but comedically, it needs to be a little bit more punchy. Same thing here, describing her family as being part of a J. Crew catalog. He probably starts with that or begins with that description if he's doing it in a slightly different venue, in a stand-up venue. But the thing that makes his use of characters interesting and why this kind of ties into chapter 10 is because we get a little bit of translingualism from Minhaj, because whenever he describes his father, he quotes his father in Hindi and then translates for us. And that creates a lot of extra texture and a lot of extra layer to his father's character. And talking about the difference between the written version and the oral version, the oral version has a quote from his father, and he has, Minhaj includes the Hindi version initially, and then he translates for us. And he doesn't do that anywhere else in the written version. Like, if you look up here, he's quoting his father. He wants to, as a kid, wants to go see Lethal Weapon 4. His father's like, we didn't come to America for Lethal Weapon 4. It shows not just who his father is, but how his father thinks. Lethal Weapon 4 isn't about entertainment or having the time or the energy. It's like, this isn't what we're doing. And this last slide is Hasan Minhaj with the ending of his story and quoting his father and really bringing the fullness of that character to life in the story. And I do have one last point to make about it. So this next part is about a minute and a half. If you want to fast forward through it and get to this last point, you can, but I just wanted to show this because I do think it is very interesting and very poignant.
He was in the hospital. So I drove up from LA to visit him, and that was the most vulnerable he had been physically and emotionally. And I remember sitting there next to him in his hospital bed, and I decided to share this prom story with him. And I remember at the end of the story, he was like, "Hasan, I'm mad at you." And I was like, "Why?" "Because I lied, because I snuck out of the house and I didn't tell you guys." And he said, "No, it's because you didn't forgive Bethany." You see, when I first immigrated to America from Aligarh, I was scared. I was scared of everything America represented. I was scared that, you'd get into a gang or you'd start doing drugs. So I tried to protect you from everything bad that could happen to you. And Bethany's parents, they were scared of us. They were scared of some sort of thing that they had seen on TV. So they were protecting her from us. And you were scared of us and she was scared of them and everybody was scared of everybody. But Hassan, himmat honi chahiye bhai. और सच बातें के लिए हिम्मत होनी चाहिए और डरना मत और तुम्हारा हिम्मत डरने से ज्यादा होनी चाहिए. Hassan, you gotta be brave, man. And your courage to do what's right has to be greater than your fear of getting hurt. And there's some days where I feel like I can forgive Bethany. And there's some days where I feel like I can't. But I'm gonna try to be brave. I'm gonna try to be brave for me and Dad. Thank you.
Okay.
He was in the hospital.
Wow.
So,
All right. So one last thing about about prom is that when it comes to the moth, stories have to be true. Stand up that's not the case necessarily, as long as it's funny. And some of you might have known. This part of the story, at least some of it has come out that it's not quite true. So if you go to the Moth page, this story isn't on there. So I find that interesting because Hasan Minhaj has another Moth story that is on the Moth page. So I don't know how my research is going to take this aspect of the narrative of the discourse and tie it into what we've been doing with language and linguistics. But I do think that one of the directions I want to go in is maybe looking at prom as this metaphor and what happens when this metaphor stays around so long that the original people involved in the metaphor can say, hey, wait, something isn't quite right with this metaphor. So anyway, that's just one of the directions I'm thinking of going in. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and y'all, good luck on the rest of the semester.